Hello and welcome to another safety update. Hi, of course, I'm Sam. And this one's going to be a little bit different than normal safety updates, in case you haven't been able to tell already, just with the different camera angle. But we've been getting a couple questions about some pre-trip inspection stuff. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to actually go down to the shop, which is behind me here, and talk to one of the mechanics, talk to Aaron, and see just what you should be looking for in a pre-trip inspection. So we're gonna go down to the shop. Aaron's gonna take it away.
Hi everyone, Aaron from the shop here. We'll be going over a pre-trip inspection here. So generally when I go over an inspection under the hood, I like to make it easy and I go from bottom to top. So you're gonna wanna look over all your suspension components. So we're gonna start with our leaf spring here. So we're going to want to make sure we have everything to secure the spring in place. Your spring hanger here, this big piece, you're going to want to make sure you have all of your bolts secure and in place. So moving back, U-bolts right here, these are what hold the spring to the axle itself. So you're going to want to make sure you don't see any signs here of like rust where the spring has moved around. That would indicate your U-bolts are getting loose or have broken. So that's a good indication. If you see rust anywhere, that's generally a good indicator of something being loose. So you're going to want to check your shock absorber here, make sure that is secure, all your bolts are in place. Your rear spring shackle and hanger back there, same thing. We're looking for all our bolts being in place and secure. From there, you can look at the inside of the wheel here. So if you start to see any kind of oil accumulation in here, that's a good sign that you've got a wheel seal blown out. Brake caliper, all your bolts are in place and your brake caliper is secure. Airlines, same thing, everything is secure and tight and it's not rubbing on anything. That would be an obvious DOT failure for brake lines rubbing, or a splice in any kind of brake related airline is a DOT failure, so you want to check for those as well. Tires, so generally you can get a good idea if your tread depth is close or not. 430 seconds is your legal limit. So on the outside of the wheel, if you see any kind of oil accumulation, like we've got a little bit going on here, you probably want to take these off or let the shop know and we can see if you've got a hubcap leaking. If you could see the lug nuts, you want to make sure all of those are there and tight. On an aluminum wheel, if you see any kind of like white powdery substance around the lug nuts, that's a good indication of them being loose or corroded. So you want to check the wheel over for any cracks. That would be an obvious DOT failure if your wheel is starting to fail. You can't have any welds on any wheel, so you want to look for those as well. If you see any type of repair on a wheel, that is not good. So moving up from our suspension components, we're going to start to check over for leaks. So any kind of exhaust leak will be evidenced by like signs of black soot. So we have our exhaust manifold in here. You can kind of check on the engine, especially on these freshly painted ones. It'll be pretty obvious when you have an exhaust leak. You'll see black soot coming out from around the ports. Where the turbo mounts, same thing. If you see any kind of black soot, that would indicate a leak. There is coolant and oil running to your turbocharger, so there's a few fittings. You can look it over. Generally everything's going to drip down and leak off the bottom if it is leaking, so you've got an oil drain off the bottom and coolant lines. So that's something to look at as well. Moving up from there, we can talk about, this is the alternator. So this provides power for all the components on the truck, all your accessory components, charges the batteries, all of that. So you're going to want to look over your belt, make sure that that is tight and you don't see any cracks or missing ribs. They can start to deteriorate and you'll see parts of the belt coming off or shredding, so you want to check for that. Water pump is going to be directly below your alternator, so same thing, that's belt driven. You're going to want to check that over. When a water pump starts to go bad, they're designed to pass a little bit of coolant out of what's called the weep hole. So if you look down here and you see a bunch of coolant directly below the water pump, it's kind of hard to see on the camera, but in person you can kind of see it better when they're really leaking. So moving up from there, AC compressor, also belt driven. So this one's probably not something you guys are gonna worry about, but just like our suspension components, we're gonna be checking over all of the mounting bolts that secure that, make sure they're all tight and securely holding on the components. What else can we talk about? We can move back here. So on these engines and these trucks, there's a lot of coolant lines that run back here, supplying coolant to both the front and the rear heater cores. So you can get some common leaks back here where the coolant lines are coming out of the engine. Those are usually pretty obvious. When they're leaking real bad, they'll be running coolant down the back side of the engine here. So you want to look those over. Moving up from there, we're going to have part of our HVAC system. So under this cover here, this is going to be the filter for the cabin air. So if you start to have intermittent AC issues, this is usually the first thing I check. If this is really dirty, it can allow basically part of the AC system to freeze up and you won't have AC for a little bit. So these are pretty easy to change or just knock out quick if there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. This one's fairly clean. So we'll probably move on to the other side of the engine here. So same thing on this side of the engine and the truck here. We're gonna go from the bottom to top. Same, everything that we check suspension wise is gonna be the same over here. We're gonna make sure all our spring hangers and shackles are securely fastened. All our bolts are in place. Our shock, rear spring hangers back there. And this side also has all your steering components. So this is a big thing on a DOT like pre-trip inspection. They actually want you to put your hands on this here. This is called the steering shaft, and it's got two U-joints, one at each end. So you're going to want to kind of shake that, make sure it's solid, and then you can go back and forth to get an idea of how much play the actual steering gearbox has. Steering gearbox, on this side of the engine, it's a lot more common for different kinds of leaks. So a common spot for a power steering leak is at this hose here, this fitting, which is the return fitting out of the gearbox. So it'll either leak up here and be dripping down the filter and the reservoir, or be dripping here and just running down the power steering gearbox itself. So this component here, this is our pitman arm. That's what actually connects the gearbox to the drag link, which is this component here. The drag link connects to the steering knuckle, and that's what actually transfers the steering action to the wheels and tires. So these, you can kind of give them a shake, make sure they're not tight. You're going to want to make sure that your cotter pins for the castle nuts are in place at both ends of the drag link here. So these ones are good. That prevents the nut from backing off. Just like with wheels, it's not permissible to have any kind of welding repair on a power steering gearbox. So you just want to make sure that you don't see any evidence of that. If they break, they have to be replaced. So we'll look at the same thing on the wheel, any signs of oil on the inside or the outside of the wheel. Tires, same thing, checking for tread depth. So we have some fuel system components over here. This is your fuel water separator. If you see, this is a normal level for the fuel to sit in here. This black line on your filter, if the fuel is at that level, that's a good indication that your filter is too dirty and it should be changed. We generally, with our oil change intervals and service intervals, we don't let them get that bad. But if you ever do have it get up there, let us know, or get them changed on the road somewhere. So back in here behind our power steering reservoir, we've got the power steering pump. These don't leak all that often, but there are still a couple fittings here that can end up leaking. So that is attached to the backside of the air compressor. Our air compressors are gear driven. Just want to make sure that all the bolts securing that are in place and that component is properly secured. So up in here on these new style trucks, we've got our coolant reservoir. There's a couple marks on there for cold full and cold minimum. So when the truck is cold, this one's empty right now, so you can't really see it, but when it's full, it'll be somewhere between those two lines. We'll kind of move forward from there. We've got our radiator and charge air cooler. So our radiator is the heat exchanger for the engine coolant, and then our charge air cooler cools all of the air that's going from the turbo into the engine. You're not really going to be able to see leaks here, but you could potentially see some leaks on the radiator. There's a couple coolant lines that run there. You want to definitely check those over for drips. You can kind of poke your head in here. I don't know if the camera will be able to see it, but you can kind of get a look at the front side of your radiator. Make sure that you don't have too much debris built up in there. When they get real dirty, we can have cooling issues, so just want to stay on top of that. Right here, we've got our engine oil dipstick, so definitely want to check that and make sure our oil level is at the proper amount. This one is a bit low. So on these trucks, it is exactly 1 gallon from the add line to the full line. So this one probably would be maybe 1.25 gallons low. So you definitely want to top that off. From there, we've got our power steering reservoir. Just like the coolant reservoir, this has a few marks on it. You know, what's full when it's cold, where the add line is when it's cold, but it also has marks for full and add when it's hot. So that's just regular ATF. Even says right here, approve ATF only, and that's just regular Dexmerc ATF that we use in there.
All right, so hopefully you learned a couple things, or maybe you brushed up on some knowledge. I know sometimes it seems like you kind of go over and over and over things and you kind of forget some stuff and whatever. So hopefully that helped you remember a couple things maybe you're doing wrong, or showed you a couple things on how to do some things differently. But anyways, but thank you, Aaron, for showing us that stuff. If you do have questions about any sort of pre-trip stuff, let me know. You can either, contact me, call me, email me, whatever. My contact information is at the bottom. But until next time, drive safe.